Welcome to this explainer. All right, I want you to picture this. It's December of 1872, and we are right in the middle of the vast, choppy Atlantic Ocean. Out of nowhere, a ship is just drifting aimlessly. The sails are kind of torn, the rigging is just blowing in the wind, but the vessel itself, it's in perfectly seaworthy condition. There's just one absolutely chilling problem here. There is literally no one on board. Zero. This is the Mary Celeste, the most famous ghost ship in all of maritime history. It was discovered completely empty, floating like a silent phantom across the sea. So here is the core mystery we're going to unravel today. Why on earth would a highly experienced captain, his family, and his entire crew just suddenly abandon a perfectly sound ship, a ship that still had 6 months of food and water on board, mind you? Now, over the years, people have blamed pretty much everything for this. Giant squids, sea monsters, crazy paranormal activity. But today, we're tackling this forensic puzzle using only scientifically supported facts. No myths, no legends, just the hard evidence. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the ghost ship's discovery. Let's map out the crucial timeline here, that specific window when this ship actually became a derelict ghost ship. So, on November 7th, the Mary Celeste heads out from New York, bound for Genoa, Italy. Everything seems totally normal. The last entry in the ship's log was made 19 days later, on November 25th, which places them somewhere near the Azores Islands. But when the ship Dei Gratia finally spots her on December 4th, 9 entire days had passed in total silence. Something absolutely catastrophic had to have happened during that brief 9-day window. Moving on to Section 2, who was on board? To really understand this mystery, we have to look at the people who vanished into thin air. See, the Mary Celeste wasn't crewed by a bunch of inexperienced rookies, not at all. The captain was Benjamin Spooner Briggs. He was a highly respected veteran mariner. He was known as an observant Christian and a super dedicated family man. In fact, he actually had his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia right there on board with him. Alongside them were 7 highly capable, hand-picked crewmen, all with glowing reputations. The absolute crucial takeaway here is this. A panicked, irrational abandonment of a perfectly safe ship is deeply, deeply out of character for a guy like Captain Briggs, especially with his infant daughter on board. Now for the really interesting part. Section 3, analyzing the physical clues. I want you to act like a forensic investigator for a second. When the ship was finally boarded by the first mate of the Dei Gratia, Oliver DeVoe, the clues they found were chilling exactly because of how mundane they were. Okay, so there was about 3.5 feet of water in the hold. The ship's small yawl, which is its single lifeboat, was completely missing. A sounding rod, the tool used to measure water in the hold, was just discarded on the deck. The glass on the compass housing was broken, and yet the cargo, 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, was perfectly intact. And honestly, perhaps most hauntingly of all, the personal belongings of the crew, even their valuables, were entirely undisturbed. The ship was totally seaworthy, packed with 6 months of food, and yet everyone had simply vanished. Now, you might be thinking, 3.5 feet of water? That means the ship was sinking. But for a ship of this size, that is absolutely not an alarming amount of water. It's actually a very manageable leak. A minor amount of water like that simply would not scare a veteran captain into putting his wife and toddler into a tiny rowboat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. For sure, this just deepens the whole mystery. So, what really happened? Let's look at Section 4, ruling out foul play. Right after this happened, at the Gibraltar salvage hearings of 1872, these wild, sensational theories quickly took hold. People were claiming it was a violent mutiny, or maybe pirates from Morocco, or even some elaborate insurance fraud scheme. But look at the physical evidence. It tells a completely different story. Think about it. Pirates absolutely would have taken the cargo and the valuables, but both of those were completely untouched. And as for a mutiny, well, an investigator claimed to have found bloodstains on a sword and on the deck, but later on, scientific testing proved definitively that those stains were not blood at all. The evidence simply does not support any theory of foul play. Even with that total lack of evidence, the Attorney General of Gibraltar, a guy named Frederick Solly Flood, aggressively pushed this murder narrative. Historians have described him as the sort of man who, once he had made up his mind about something, couldn't be shifted. I mean, he even claimed that cuts on the ship's bow were from an axe. However, a U.S. Navy captain named Schufelt investigated the ship and proved those marks were literally just natural sea wear on the timbers. So the whole foul play theory, officially a dead end. Now, what's really fascinating about this next part is how we solve it. Section 5, the scientific explanations. If it wasn't pirates, and the ship wasn't actually sinking, modern science gives us some incredibly plausible answers. Remember that sounding rod we talked about, the one found abandoned on the deck? Well, one highly compelling theory involves a waterspout, which is basically a massive tornado over the water. A severe waterspout creates this extreme sudden drop in barometric pressure. That pressure drop could have literally driven water from the bilges right up into the pumps, making them totally malfunction. So when the crew went to use that sounding rod, it would have given them a completely false reading. In the absolute chaos of a violent storm, Captain Briggs might have genuinely believed his ship was rapidly taking on water and was about to plunge to the bottom of the ocean. Okay, so that explains the potential water scare. But what about the cargo? We're talking about 1,701 barrels of highly volatile crude alcohol. Interestingly enough, the ship's log had actually mentioned some ominous rumblings and really strange noises coming from the hold in the days just before they abandoned ship. And that leads us to the most scientifically supported theory of all, a pressure wave explosion. Let's walk through this step by step because it's wild. Step 1, a few of those porous barrels leak volatile alcohol vapors into the super tight enclosed hold of the ship. Step 2, someone goes below deck, maybe to check out those weird rumblings, and a random spark or an open flame ignites that trapped gas. Step 3, boom. A massive, terrifying blast blows the heavy hatch covers straight off the deck. Step 4, believing that the entire ship, which, remember, is holding 1,700 barrels of highly flammable liquid, is about to blow into 1,000,000 pieces, Captain Briggs flies into an absolute panic and orders an immediate evacuation. Honestly, it's pretty much the one scenario terrifying enough to force a seasoned captain into a tiny lifeboat. Now, you're probably asking yourself, wait, if there was a massive explosion, why wasn't the ship burned? It's a great question. Modern chemists at University College London and the University of Manchester actually built scale models of the ship's hold to test this. Using butane and paper, and later exact replicas using ethanol and wood, they successfully recreated this exact type of blast. And guess what? They proved that it creates what's called a pressure wave explosion. This means it produces a spectacular, totally terrifying wave of flame, but it leaves behind relatively cool air. Literally zero soot, no scorching, and absolutely no fire damage is left behind. It would look like a deadly, catastrophic explosion, but leave the physical ship perfectly intact. Section 6. An enduring maritime mystery. When we take a step back and put all these scientific findings together, a really grim and tragic narrative emerges. Believing his ship was either sinking from that false pump reading or about to be completely vaporized by an alcohol explosion, Captain Briggs had to make a split-second decision. He and the crew piled into the small yawl, planning to just trail behind the ship on a rope until the danger passed. But in their sheer terror and haste, they failed to properly secure that main tow line. A sudden breeze catches the Mary Celeste's partially set sails. The heavy rope snaps, or maybe it just slips, and in an instant, their empty, perfectly safe ship sails away without them. It leaves 10 people, including a 2-year-old child, stranded in a tiny rowboat in the middle of the unforgiving Atlantic Ocean, where they ultimately succumb to the elements. And so, the Mary Celeste sailed on. A ghost ship created not by sea monsters or pirates, but by a tragically human mistake born of pure fear. It really reminds us of the profound fragility of human life at sea, and just how quickly our own survival instincts can actually lead to our doom. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. Knowing this science, the volatile cargo, and the chaos of those false readings, what would you have done in Captain Briggs' shoes?